It started as just another afternoon for 16-year-old Maya. She had just left a friend's house, her curly hair bouncing in the wind, when flashing red and blue lights suddenly lit up the street behind her. A police officer pulled up, his eyes cold and judgmental, before she even said a word. At first, Maya thought it was just another stop, another excuse to question someone who looked like her. But what happened next was something she never expected. The officer didn't just ask for her ID. He didn't just pat her down. He humiliated her in a way she would never forget. Right there on the sidewalk, under the eyes of strangers, he grabbed a pair of clippers and shaved off her hair. Every curl, every strand, gone. She could feel the eyes of onlookers, their silence screaming louder than any words. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wanted to fight back, to scream, but she was frozen. Powerless, until a black SUV screeched to a stop. The door flew open, and out stepped her father. But he wasn't just any father. He was a lawyer. A man who had spent his life fighting cases just like this. And in that moment, as he locked eyes with the officer, the entire situation was about to take a turn no one saw coming. Maya's father, Anthony Carter, stepped out of the SUV with a presence that made the air shift. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his tie slightly loosened, as if he had just left the courtroom. But right now, he wasn't just a lawyer. He was a father staring at his daughter, her shaved head glistening under the streetlights, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. His heart pounded. He had spent years defending innocent people from injustices like this, but nothing could prepare him for seeing his own child in this position. His little girl, humiliated, stripped of her dignity, and the man responsible for it stood there with no remorse, his hand still gripping the electric clippers as if he had done nothing wrong. Maya's eyes locked onto her father's, a silent plea hidden behind her shock. Anthony inhaled deeply, keeping his voice steady despite the fire burning in his chest. "What did you just do to my daughter?" His tone was calm, controlled, but there was an edge to it, the kind that made even the most confident men second-guess themselves. The officer smirked, arms crossed. She was resisting. Had to make sure she wasn't hiding anything in all that hair. Anthony's jaw tightened. He knew this game too well, and he wasn't about to let it slide. Maya felt her father's presence like a shield, but the shame still clung to her skin. She wanted to run to him, to bury her face in his chest like she did when she was a little girl, but she couldn't move. Not yet. Not while that officer stood there, smug and unbothered, as if her pain meant nothing. Anthony took a slow step forward, his sharp eyes scanning the officer's badge. "Officer Daniels, is it?" His voice remained steady, but there was something beneath it, something that made the air heavier. "You just assaulted a minor. You do realize that, don't you?" Daniels chuckled, shaking his head. "I did what was necessary." She was acting suspicious, refused to answer my questions. And when I told her to remove anything that could be hiding contraband, she hesitated. He motioned toward the scattered curls on the ground. "Can't be too careful these days." Maya clenched her jaw, suspicious, for walking home. Her father had told her stories about cases like this, cases where people who looked like her were treated as threats before they even spoke. But she never thought she'd become one of them. A few bystanders had gathered now, whispering, recording with their phones. The weight of their stares mixed with the distant hum of passing traffic, creating a charged silence. Anthony exhaled, his fingers twitching at his sides, but he didn't let his anger take over. He knew better. Knew that men like Daniels thrived on pushing people past their limits. Instead, he turned toward Maya. "Are you okay?" His voice softened, just enough for her to hear. She swallowed hard. I just, I didn't do anything, Dad. I was just walking. I know, he said, nodding, before turning back to Daniels. And now you're going to explain exactly why you thought this was justified. Because if you can't, I suggest you start making some calls. You'll be needing a lawyer. Daniel stiffened, his smirk fading just slightly. Look, sir, I was doing my job. If you have a problem with that, take it up with the department. Anthony pulled out his phone, already dialing. Oh, don't worry, I will. Maya's breath hitched as she watched the shift in Daniel's posture. He wasn't as relaxed now. He wasn't grinning. And for the first time since this nightmare started, she felt something new creeping in beneath the humiliation. Hope. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken words. Maya could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears as her father held the phone to his ear, waiting. Daniel shifted slightly, glancing toward the gathering crowd. The smirk he had worn so confidently just minutes ago was fading, replaced by something else, uncertainty. Anthony's voice remained steady, controlled. Yes, I need an immediate response unit at my location. I have an officer who unlawfully detained and assaulted my daughter. I also want the precinct's superior on the line now. He paused, his eyes locked onto Daniel's. Yes, I'll hold. Daniel scoffed, crossing his arms again, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. You're making a scene over nothing, he muttered. Your daughter was being uncooperative. Maya's fists clenched. Uncooperative. Her voice wavered between anger and disbelief. You stopped me for no reason. You never even told me why. And then she swallowed, her fingers brushing against her bare scalp. You did this. A few gasps came from the crowd. The weight of what had happened was finally sinking in for everyone watching. Phones were still recording, capturing every second. Anthony took a step closer to Daniel's. I know exactly how this works. You profile, you intimidate, and then you cover it up. He gestured toward Maya. But this time, you picked the wrong person. Daniel's radio crackled, and a voice on the other end spoke hurriedly. He reached for it, responding in clipped words, his face unreadable. But something was changing. His stance was no longer casual. His fingers tightened around the radio. Maya's breathing was shallow, her hands shaking at her sides. This was the moment where everything could tip in either direction. Would Daniels double down, try to twist the story? Would backup arrive and turn this into something worse? Or was her father's presence, his knowledge of the law, finally forcing the system to pay attention? Anthony lowered his phone, staring Daniels down. You still think you're in control of this situation? He asked quietly. Daniels didn't answer. For the first time since this all started, Maya saw hesitation in his eyes. And that's when the first siren blared in the distance. The sound of the siren sent a ripple through the crowd. People whispered, their phones still raised, waiting to see how this would play out. Maya's pulse quickened. For a second, she thought this was it, the moment things would finally be set right. But then she saw Daniel's expression shift. Not to fear, not to regret, but to something else. Relief. The realization hit her like a punch to the stomach. Whoever was coming wasn't here to hold him accountable. They were here for something else. Anthony saw it too. His grip on his phone tightened as a second patrol car rolled up, stopping just inches from where Maya's curls still lay scattered on the pavement. Two officers stepped out, their faces unreadable, but their body language spoke volumes. They weren't here to question Daniels. They were here to back him up. One officer, a broad-shouldered man with a silver badge, stepped forward. Sir, we received a report of a disturbance. We need you to lower your voice and step back. His tone was firm but rehearsed, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. Anthony let out a slow breath, his jaw tightening. A disturbance? The only disturbance here is your officer violating my daughter's rights. He turned his phone around, showing the screen. I've already contacted legal representation. Every second you stand here without addressing what happened is making things worse for you. Daniel smirked again, folding his arms. You can try, but this is police business. Your daughter was detained for suspicious behavior. End of story. Maya felt her stomach turn. Suspicious behavior. She had heard those words before. They were the kind people used when they wanted to justify the unjustifiable. Anthony wasn't backing down. End of story. No, Officer Daniels. This is just beginning. Then, before anyone could respond, another car pulled up. But this one wasn't a police cruiser. It was sleek, black, with tinted windows that reflected the flashing lights. The driver's side door swung open, and a man in a gray suit stepped out, moving with calm, measured steps. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She recognized him instantly. Her father's law partner, one of the top civil rights attorneys in the city. Daniel's smirk faltered. The second officer hesitated. The energy in the air shifted, crackling with something new. The fight wasn't over. It was just getting started. The moment the lawyer stepped out of the car, the entire mood shifted. He adjusted his cufflinks, eyes scanning the situation like he was already building a case in his head. He barely spared Daniels a glance before walking straight to Anthony. "Everything's recorded?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Anthony nodded. "Every second." The lawyer turned, finally giving Daniels his full attention. "Officer Daniels," he said smoothly, "I suggest you choose your next words carefully. Because as of right now, you're looking at multiple violations, including unlawful detention, excessive force, and destruction of personal property. And with all these witnesses," he motioned toward the growing crowd, "this is going to be a problem for you. A very public one." Daniel's smirk was gone now, replaced with something much closer to panic. He glanced at the senior officer, expecting backup, but the man hesitated. He was seeing it too. The tide was turning. Maya stood frozen, watching as Daniel's confidence cracked piece by piece. For the first time, he looked unsure. He looked afraid. The lawyer wasn't done. "I assume your body cam was on." He tilted his head. Or did it just happen to be malfunctioning? Daniels opened his mouth, but no words came out. The senior officer sighed, rubbing a hand down his face before finally turning to Daniels. "You need to step away," he said under his breath. "Now." Daniel's eyes darted around, desperate to regain control. "I was just following protocol." "No," Anthony cut in sharply. "You were abusing your power. And now you're going to be held accountable." The second officer took a slow step back, and then, in a move no one expected, he reached for Daniel's radio. "Dispatch," he said into it. "I need immediate oversight at my location. Possible misconduct." Daniel's face went pale. "You're seriously—" The senior officer raised a hand. "Enough, Daniels. We'll handle it from here." Maya felt her breath shudder in her chest. Was this really happening? Daniels looked around, desperate for someone, anyone, to take his side. But there was no one left. Then the final blow came. Anthony turned his phone around, holding up the screen. "This," he said, showing the live streaming app still running. "This is already online." Daniel's shoulders slumped. His career, his reputation, it was crumbling right in front of him. Maya exhaled, her fingers brushing against her bare scalp. She had lost something tonight, but she had also won something bigger. Justice. Maya stood there, the night air cool against her exposed skin, as the weight of everything settled in. The sirens had faded, the officers stepping aside, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt like she could breathe. Daniels was led away, not in cuffs, but in shame. His face was tight, his steps stiff, but he knew his actions had consequences. The senior officer assured Anthony that an internal investigation would begin immediately. But Maya knew better than to believe words alone. That's why the footage, the witnesses, and her father's relentless pursuit of justice mattered. Anthony turned to Maya, his eyes searching hers. "You okay?" She wanted to say yes, that she was fine, that it didn't matter. But it did. The sting of what happened wouldn't fade overnight. She had lost something tonight, her dignity, her trust in a system meant to protect. But she had also gained something: strength, a voice. "I will be," she finally said. Anthony placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and sure. "We'll fight this. You won't go through it alone." Maya nodded, glancing at the scattered curls on the ground. This wasn't the ending she wanted, but it was a beginning. A reminder that standing up mattered. That silence was never an option. And she would never be silent again.